The wind had a cruel way of scraping the land bare that summer. Dust clung to every crevice of Calder Briggs' old ranch boots as he rode along the edge of his northern property line, where the barbed wire fence struggled to stand against time and weather. His horse, Dagger, trotted slow, each hoof step puffing small clouds of dirt into the air. It hadn't rained in over a month, and even the cactus seemed weary. Calder wasn't expecting to find anything but broken wire and a few straggling cattle. That morning, he certainly wasn't expecting a girl. At first, he thought she was a mirage. A small bent figure in the dirt, knees pressed into the dry earth, hands digging at something in the hard ground. She didn't look up as he approached, didn't flinch when the horse snorted a warning breath. She was young. Maybe 18, maybe older. Her hair was tangled and caked with dust. Her dress hung off her thin frame in tatters, the fabric sun-bleached and torn at the knees. One of her bare feet was bleeding. Calder could see the red against the bone-white soil. "What are you digging for?" he asked, not unkindly. The girl froze, her hand stilled. She turned her head slowly, eyes squinting up at him through the bright morning sun. "Roots," she said simply. Her voice was raspy, cracked like a dry riverbed. "Roots won't do much to fill you." Her gaze flicked to the saddlebag on his horse, then back to the ground. She didn't answer. Calder stepped off his horse. The sun beat down on his shoulders, but he didn't rush. He didn't want to scare her off. There was something in the way she crouched like a feral animal bracing for a blow. "I've got food," he said, his tone calm, even, "not looking to hurt you. Just don't reckon you should be out here alone." She didn't speak, but her eyes darted toward the brush behind her, like she was thinking about running. Calder could see the tremble in her arms, thin and sunburnt, shaking from either fear or hunger, or both. He unhooked his saddlebag and pulled out a wrapped cloth. Inside, there was a chunk of cornbread, a strip of dried beef, and a canteen of water. He knelt down, slow and deliberate, and placed it on a flat rock between them. She stared at the offering, unmoving. "I ain't gonna ask who you are or where you come from," he said, standing again. "Not unless you want me to." The silence stretched. Calder adjusted his hat, glanced once more at the surrounding horizon, then gave a short nod. "Suit yourself," he said, and started to walk back to his horse. He was nearly in the saddle again when he heard the rustle. She was crawling toward the food hands, shaking, mouth open as she took in a desperate breath. She tore into the cornbread. First, crumbs falling down her chin. Then she tipped the canteen back, water spilling over her cheeks and soaking into her ragged collar. Calder didn't watch long. It felt wrong somehow to witness that kind of hunger. He turned his eyes toward the distant hills, toward the stretch of fence that still needed mending. But even as he mounted up and gave Dagger a gentle nudge, he kept glancing over his shoulder. She never said thank you. She didn't need to dot. By the time Calder made it back to the house that evening, the memory of the girl still clung to him like the dust on his coat. Miss Willa, his housekeeper and surrogate aunt, met him at the porch with her usual scowl and a hot plate of stew. She eyed him suspiciously as he sat down to eat. "You're quiet," she said. "Saw a girl on the north boundary. Looked near starved. Did you bring her in?" "No. Gave her some food, though," Miss Willa huffed. "And you just rode away?" "She wasn't ready. Spooked easy. But she didn't run." The old woman studied him a moment. Then she turned toward the kitchen. "If she's still there tomorrow," she said, "you bring her in. No soul survives long out there alone." Calder didn't sleep well that night. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw her hands caked in dirt, scraping desperately at dead roots. He didn't know who she was. But he knew one thing for certain. Nobody should have to dig for survival with their bare hands in Texas dirt. And no decent man could ride past that and forget. The rain came the next night hard and fast, like the sky had been holding its breath. For weeks and finally let go. It started as a faint rumble beyond the canyon ridge and built into a full thunderstorm by dusk. Calder Briggs stood on his front porch, watching the lightning fork across the horizon while the first fat drops hit the porch roof. He was just finishing his coffee when a wet, shivering figure stumbled into the glow of the lantern light. Maybel. She didn't knock. She didn't say a word. She just stood at the edge of the barn, soaked to the skin, her arms wrapped around herself and her eyes wide with exhaustion. Calder didn't move right away. The last time he'd seen her, she was crawling toward cornbread like an animal. Now, she looked ready to collapse. He stepped off the porch and crossed the muddy yard. "You came back." She didn't answer. Her lips were blue. Her clothes were plastered to her body, and her knees were scraped raw from running. Behind her, the wind howled, and the barn door creaked on its hinges. "You walked through that storm?" he asked gently. Still no reply. Calder opened the barn door wider. "Come in. You'll freeze out here." Maybel hesitated, but the lightning cracked close, and she bolted forward. Once inside, she leaned against a post and closed her eyes like she hadn't slept in days. Calder grabbed a blanket from the saddle bench and draped it over her shoulders. "You hungry?" She nodded once. He went to the farmhouse where Miss Willa was still cleaning up after dinner. "She's back," he said. Willa didn't even blink. "Get her inside." "She's in the barn." "Not for long," Willa snapped. "You think I'm letting a half-dead girl freeze next to the hay?" "You bring her in, Calder Briggs, or I swear I'll drag her by the ears myself." Minutes later, Maybel was sitting at the kitchen table, silent as a ghost, a bowl of hot stew steaming in front of her. Her eyes flicked from Willa's worn floral apron to the silverware like she couldn't believe she was really there. "Eat, girl," Willa said softly. Maybel obeyed, slow at first, then faster, until the spoon clinked hard against the bottom of the bowl. "You want more?" Willa asked. She shook her head. "No, ma'am. Thank you." It was the first full sentence Calder had heard from her, and it sounded like a whisper, fragile, like it might break under the weight of another word. Calder sat across from her, nursing his coffee. "Storm will pass by morning," he said. "You can sleep in the spare room till then." Maybel gripped the edge of the table. "I can sleep in the barn." "I don't need a bed." "You're not sleeping in the barn," Willa interrupted. "That ain't how we treat people here." The girl's eyes dropped to her lap. "You ain't in trouble," Calder added gently. "You're safe here." That word safe hung in the air like a fragile promise. Maybel looked up, uncertain. "Why are you doing this?" she asked. "You don't know me." Calder leaned back in his chair. "Don't have to know a person to know they're cold and hungry. You needed help." "That's enough." Her lip trembled, but she turned her face before the tears could fall. "Nobody's ever been that kind." Willa stepped over and placed a warm hand on Maybel's back. "Well, then I guess today's a new start." They didn't press her with questions. Not that night. Calder offered her a dry shirt and a blanket. The spare room was simple, just a bed, a lamp, and a hand-carved dresser. She stood in the doorway for a long time before stepping inside, like she wasn't sure she deserved it. Later, Calder stood by the window, listening to the rain pound the roof. The house felt different, not just because there was a stranger in the spare room, but because she wasn't just a stranger anymore. There was something about her raw and real, like the land itself, scarred but strong underneath. And for reasons he didn't fully understand, Calder felt a quiet conviction take root inside him. He didn't just want to give her shelter for the night. He wanted to see what she'd become, if someone gave her a chance. By the time the storm cleared, the land was soaked, the ranch breathed easier, and the morning sky looked washed clean like the world had been scrubbed down overnight. Maybel stepped outside barefoot, her toes curling into the wet earth as if testing whether it would swallow her. She still wore the shirt Calder had loaned her, too big for her small frame, sleeves rolled and pinned at the cuffs, and she clutched the front of it like armor. She didn't ask to stay. Calder didn't tell her to go. Instead, he handed her a mug of hot coffee and pointed toward the barn. "If you're wanting to earn your keep, we've got fence line to check and a stubborn calf that needs some coaxing." She gave him a quiet nod, no words. Just that same guarded look in her eyes, half gratitude, half suspicion. She worked harder than he expected. She didn't complain when the mud soaked her skirt or when the calf kicked her shin. She didn't flinch when the ranch hands looked her over with side eyes and curiosity. Calder introduced her simply as May, and most of the boys left. It had that, except for Gus, the youngest hand, who kept trying to offer her his gloves, his coat, anything to make her stay warm. She smiled at Gus once. That was enough to make him stammer for the rest of the day. But Calder watched her more closely. The way she flinched at sudden loud noises. How she always sat with her back to a wall, never letting her back face a door. At night, she slept with a knife hidden under her mattress. He found it accidentally while changing out the old bedding and pretended he hadn't seen it. She was carrying something heavy, not just fear but guilt and pain. One afternoon, while they mended a stretch of broken wire, Calder finally broke the silence between them. "You ever worked ranch land before?" Maybel didn't look up from the spool of wire. "No, sir." "You're quick with your hands." "Smarter than most." She paused, then gave a short nod. "My mama taught me how to make things last. Said God don't hand you more than you need, just enough to survive." Calder tested the line tension. "Your mama still around?" A long silence. "No," she whispered. He didn't ask how. They worked in silence a while longer. Dagger whinnied nearby, and the wind picked up just enough to carry the smell of distant pine. "You running from something, May?" Calder asked gently, not looking at her. Her fingers tightened around the fencing pliers. She didn't speak for a long moment. When she finally did, her voice was quieter than the wind. "Someone." That was all she offered. Her jaw set stubbornly, warning him not to push. He didn single quotes t. Instead, he pointed toward the edge of the property. "There's an old cabin out by the creek. Used to belong to my brother before he passed. Hasn't seen much use. If you're looking to stay on and make a space of your own, might be worth fixing up." Maybel looked at him, then really looked at him for the first time since she arrived. "You trust me with that?" "I trust what I see," Calder said plainly. "You're not lazy. You're not afraid of hard work. And you don't lie with your eyes." That night, Maybel didn't eat in silence. She sat with Calder and Miss Willa and asked for more bread. She even helped clean the dishes without being asked. When Willa offered her an extra quilt, she smiled softly and whispered, "Thank you." But after they went to bed, Calder noticed the lantern in the hallway still burning. He found her in the spare room, curled on the floor beside the bed, clutching that same knife under her blanket. "You don't have to sleep like that," he said, voice low. "Ain't nobody coming through that door." She didn't look up. "You don't know him." "I don't," Calder admitted. "But I know you're not alone now." That word again. Safe. She didn't say it, but she heard it. Calder didn't press her to explain. He didn't ask for her past or pry for names. Instead, he picked up the spare pillow, handed it to her, and said, "When you're ready, that bed's yours." As he walked away, he heard her whisper into the silence, "I don't know if I'll ever be ready." And for the first time since he met her, he heard her voice crack not with fear, but with something deeper. Hope. By the end of the first week, Maybel had carved out a quiet rhythm on the ranch. She was still guarded, still thin as a rail, but there was color in her cheeks now. Her hands, though blistered, moved with purpose. She fed chickens without flinching, raked hay with grit, and even laughed once when Gus tripped over a feed bucket and blamed the rooster. She hadn't yet spoken about her past, and Calder hadn't asked again. Not because he wasn't curious, but because some things needed time to breathe, and Maybel. She was like a wild colt, scarred, jumpy, but not impossible to gentle. The days were long and dry. A stretch of barbed wire fence had come loose on the south end of the property, and Calder took Maybel with him to help fix it. She'd proven herself capable and quick-thinking, and honestly, Calder enjoyed her company more than he admitted, even to himself. The sun beat down as they worked bending wire, hammering staples, measuring the slack. Calder glanced over and saw her lips moving silently. Not a prayer, not a muttering, just focused thoughts. "You always this quiet?" he asked, pausing to wipe the sweat from his brow. She shrugged. "Talking too much gets you noticed." "That's not always safe." He nodded slowly. "Fair enough. Still, not everyone's looking to hurt you." Maybel's expression darkened. "I've met the ones who are." Before Calder could respond, the horses started to shift. Dagger snorted and pawed the ground. "Rider," Maybel said before Calder even turned. Sure enough, a lone figure on horseback was slowly making its way along the edge of the ranch road. The man didn't wear a badge, but he wasn't just passing through, he moved too slow for that. His head was down, scanning the landscape like he was searching for something. Or someone. Maybel went rigid. Calder saw her hand drift to the knife at her hip, the same one she'd been sleeping with under her blanket. "You know him?" Calder asked quietly. She nodded, just barely. "Step back. Get behind the cottonwoods." "Go now." She hesitated only a second before slipping behind the trees. She knew how to move without sound like someone who'd had to disappear more than once. The rider didn't come onto the property. He stayed on the road, just close enough for Calder to meet his eyes as he passed. A stranger broad-shouldered, with a twisted scar on the side of his jaw. He gave a slow tip of his hat but didn't speak. His eyes lingered. Then he turned his horse and rode on, vanishing down the far ridge. Maybel didn't come out right away. Calder waited. When she finally stepped from the shadows, she was pale and trembling. "You said you were safe here," she whispered. "You don't know what kind of men they are." "I don't have to," he replied. "I just know I won't let them take you." She blinked at him like she wanted to believe it but couldn't. "I know what you're thinking," he continued. "You're thinking maybe you've brought trouble to my doorstep. Maybe you should run again." She didn't deny it. "You're not a burden, May," Calder said. "You're a person, one who's worked hard and asked for nothing. You've earned more than fear." She looked down. "You don't even know what I've done." He stepped closer, his voice quiet but certain. "I don't need to. You're here now. That's what matters." Her eyes filled, but she didn't cry. Instead, she nodded once and returned to the broken fence. Without a word, she picked up a spool of wire and kept working. That night, Calder sat on the porch with Miss Willa, nursing. A cup of strong coffee while the moon climbed high above the ridge. "She's shacking like a leaf," Willa murmured. "Even when she's trying not to." "She saw someone," Calder said. "Someone who knew her," Willa sighed. "You gonna let her keep running?" "She's not running anymore." "Not if I can help it." Willa gave him a long, hard look. "You do know this ends one of two ways, right? Either that past catches up to her or you chase it off with a shotgun." "I'll load both barrels," Calder replied. Inside, Maybel lay on the bed, not on the floor anymore. The knife was still beneath her pillow, but her hands weren't clenched tonight. She stared at the ceiling, breathing slow and deep. For the first time in a long time, she didn't plan her escape, because someone was willing to stand between her and the dark. The next morning, Calder found fresh boot prints in the mud behind the barn. They weren't his. And they sure as hell didn't belong to Maybel. He crouched down, studying the tracks. Heavy heel, deep impression, someone tall, wearing worn down. riding boots. The prince led halfway toward the water trough before fading into the harder, drier ground near the tree line. He stood, jaw tight. Whoever it was had been on his land, watching, waiting. He didn't say a word to Maybel at breakfast. She was quieter than usual, sipping her coffee with a faraway look in her eyes, her fingers curling around the handle like she was holding on to something fragile. Willa noticed too, pausing mid-scramble with the eggs. "You're not eating," Willa said softly. "I'm not hungry," Maybel murmured. Calder met Willa's eyes over the table. No words were exchanged, but the message was clear: keep her close today. By mid-morning, Calder had saddled up and ridden out, rifle across his saddle, Dagger's hooves cutting clean lines through the wet soil. He followed the tracks as far as they'd go, circling back to the fence line and beyond. Whoever had been watching the ranch was smart. They didn't linger, didn't leave much behind. But Calder's gut said they'd be back. Back at the ranch, Maybel worked alongside Willa in the kitchen. It was the safest place for her now. She stirred biscuit dough with tired hands, her mind drifting between the warm smell of butter and flour and the cold certainty that the man who had followed her might be closer than she thought. When Calder returned that evening, muddy and tense, Maybel was sitting on the porch steps, her arms wrapped around her knees. She didn't look up until he was close. "Tracks," he said, getting straight to the point. "Behind the barn. Someone's been on the land." Her face went pale. "Could have been a drifter," he added quickly. "But I don't think it was. He was watching, and he's been here before." "You knew him." She didn't deny it. Her voice cracked when she finally spoke. "He's not going to stop." "Who is he?" "My stepfather," she said, eyes dark and distant. "Name's Curtis Rowe. Folks back in Sutter County call him Preacher, but don't let that fool you. He ain't holy. He runs a ranch with fists and fire. After my mama died, he made sure I knew I didn't belong anymore. And when I stood up to him, when I tried to leave, he beat me near to death. Told the sheriff I stole from him. Told the town I was wicked." She paused, drawing in a shaky breath. "I ran. I hid in canyons, lived off roots and creek water. I got far, but I always knew he'd come looking. Because he doesn't like loose ends, doesn't like being disobeyed." Calder listened, jaw tight. Fury flared in his chest, not just at what had been done to her, but at how calm she was, telling it. Like she had swallowed that pain and made it part of her bones. "He come for you once. He'll come again," Calder said. She nodded. "He wants to drag me back, make an example. Then we don't let him." She looked at him, doubt flickering behind her eyes. "You really think you can stop him?" "I don't just think it, I know it. This is my land. He steps one foot on it again, he won't be walking off it." Silence stretched between them. Then, quietly, Maybel reached into the pocket of her apron and pulled out a folded letter. "I wrote to my sister," she said. "She's still there, younger than me. I left her behind when I escaped. I didn't have a choice." Calder took the letter gently. "You want me to send this?" She nodded. He tucked it into his coat. "I'll ride to town tomorrow. Hand it to the postmaster myself." Maybel's shoulders relaxed a fraction. That night, Calder sat alone on the porch long after the house had gone quiet. He kept the rifle across his lap, watching the dark, waiting. Maybel's past wasn't just shadowing her, it was hunting her. Now it had to get through him first. Calder rode into town early the next morning, the letter to Maybel's sister tucked safely inside his coat. The sky was still gray with dawn, the streets mostly empty, save for the usual early risers. Old Mr. Vickers sweeping his porch, a couple of ranch hands loitering outside the blacksmith's, and Martha Jennings opening up her cafe. He tied Dagger outside the general store and walked to the post office. The postmaster, Henry Dobbs, looked up from his ledgers with a sleepy nod. "Morning, Briggs," Henry said. "Haven't seen you in a while." Calder handed over the sealed envelope. Need this sent to Sutter County. Private delivery. I want to know when it gets there. Dobbs squinted at the handwriting. Sender's a May Quinn? Calder didn't answer. Just looked him dead in the eye. The postmaster cleared his throat and nodded. Understood. I'll make sure it gets priority. Calder tipped his hat and stepped back onto the boardwalk, but he didn't get far before a familiar voice stopped. Him cold. You talking in strays now, Briggs? He turned. Sheriff Alton Reed leaned against the rail, chewing on a toothpick, squinting through the morning glare. Behind him, 2 deputies stood by the jailhouse, watching. What business is it of yours? Calder asked. Alton shrugged. Town's been talking. Girl shows up out of nowhere. Young, skittish. Lives out on your ranch now. Some folks are wondering who she is and what she's hiding. Calder's jaw tensed. She's none of their concern. Maybe not. But word travels, Calder. Especially when lawmen from Sutter County start sniffing around, askin if a runaway girl's passed through here. That hit harder than a kick to the chest. They give a name? Calder asked. No, but the description? Matches your new. Ranch hand real close. Alton stepped in closer, lowering his voice. I ain't looking to make trouble. But if this girl's got trouble trailing her legal or otherwise, you better think long and hard about whether she's worth a fight. Calder didn't flinch. She is. The sheriff studied him for a beat, then nodded slowly. You always were stubborn. And you always were too careful. With that, Calder turned and mounted up, leaving the sheriff standing there with dust on his boots and questions on his tongue. Back at the ranch, Maybel stood near the stable, feeding apples to Dagger. She wore a borrowed dress from Miss Willa, and her hair was braided loosely down her back. She looked more like a rancher's daughter than a runaway, but Calder could still see the tension in her eyes when he returned. You went to town, she said softly. Yeah, sent the letter. Got something else too. Her brow furrowed. What? Calder dismounted slowly, his face unreadable. Word's out. Lawmen from Sutter County have been asking around. Sheriff Reed knows someone's looking for you. Maybel paled. Then? I have to go. No, Calder said firmly. You don't. They'll come here, Calder. You could lose your land. You could get hurt. I've lived through worse. You don't understand what Curtis can do. I don't care what he can do. Calder stepped closer, his voice steady. I care what he won't do, and that's take you from here. You're not alone anymore, May. Her throat worked. As she swallowed, You're willing to fight for me? I already am. She turned away, shoulders shaking. Not from fear, but from the weight of what it meant to be believed, protected. Fought for doubt from the porch. Willa watched silently, arms folded. She'd seen many things over the years, storms, stampedes, even a gunfight or two, but nothing as dangerous or as powerful as what she saw growing now between that broken girl and the man too stubborn to let her fall. Later that night, Maybel sat by the fire, staring into the flickering light. Willa brought her a cup of tea and said quietly, "Don't let guilt tell you who you are, and don't let fear tell you what you're worth." Maybel looked up. "He made me believe I was nothing." Willa's eyes softened. "Then it's time to believe someone else." Outside, Calder loaded fresh shells into his shotgun. He'd nailed extra planks across the back barn door, set new oil in the lanterns, and locked the gates with fresh chains. He wasn't just protecting his land anymore. He was protecting home because somehow, somewhere in the dust and silence, Maybel had become just that asterisk. The wind shifted the morning after Calder returned from town. It carried the heavy scent of sagebrush and storm, but underneath that, Maybel sensed something else. Change. She moved slower than usual that day, hands distracted as she mucked stalls and fed the hens. Willa had noticed it too. The older woman watched Maybel like a hawk watches the horizon calm, patient but prepared for trouble. After lunch, Calder called Maybel to the porch. He held out a second letter unfolded, worn at the corners. "I found this," he said, "in the drawer beside your bed." Maybel froze. "You read it?" "No," he said honestly. "But I could tell what it was." She stepped forward slowly and took the letter from his hand. Her thumb traced over the lines she'd written weeks ago. "It wasn't finished," she whispered. "I didn't know if she'd even remember me, or if it was right to write." "Your sister?" Calder asked. Maybel nodded. "Joni. She's 16 now. When I left, I didn't have time to say goodbye. Curtis kept her close, used her against me every chance he could. I thought if I escaped, he'd stop hurting her. But I was wrong. I know he blames her for letting me run." Calder's voice softened. "That's not your fault." Maybel sat on the porch steps, the letter crumpled lightly in her fingers. "I wanted to send it so many times. I kept rewriting it. First it was just to say I was alive, then to tell her I was sorry, then to warn her. But every time I tried, I pictured Curtis finding it first, and I was afraid she'd pay the price." She looked up, tears balanced in her eyes. "I didn't mean for you to see it, I know," Calder said. "But I sent the first letter, and I got a reply." He pulled another envelope from his coat pocket newer with Joni's handwriting. Scrawled across the front, Maybel stared at it like it might catch fire. "You? You heard back?" "She's at the preacher's ranch still, but she's safe. She says she misses you every day. Says she never believed what Curtis told the town. She wants to see you. Says she's proud you ran." Maybel opened the letter with shaking hands, reading in silence as her eyes filled and overflowed. Each line felt like sunlight through cold skin. She held the letter to her chest and bent forward, crying not the frightened, broken kind she was used to, but the kind that came when a heart remembered it wasn't dead. Calder didn't move. He gave her space. Let her unravel without judgment. After a long while she whispered, "She wants to leave. She said if I send for her, she'd come." "Then we'll send for her," he said simply. "She has no money, no way out. And Curtis watches her like a hawk. If he finds out she wrote to me, we'll figure it out," Calder interrupted. "You're not doing this alone anymore. I've got friends between here and Sutter. Men who owe me. We'll get her here, quiet, safe." Maybel looked at him like she didn't quite believe he was real. "You'd do all that. For me? I'm not doing it for you," he said, then added gently, "I'm doing it because I care about you." The words hung in the air, tender. And exposed, Maybel blinked hard, trying to hold herself steady. What if Curtis comes first? Calder's jaw tightened. Then he'll learn what it feels like to pick a fight with someone who's not afraid of him. That night, Maybel stayed by the fire longer than usual. She wrote a new letter, this one confident, finished, signed. Calder promised he'd send it first thing in the morning dot as she handed him the folded page. Her eyes searched his. "I don't know how to thank you," she said. "You don't have to," he replied. "But when she gets here, maybe you'll stop thinking you're a burden." She nodded, smiling through tears. "You make it real easy to hope again." That night, for the first time since arriving at the ranch, Maybel didn't sleep with her. Knife under her pillow. She didn't need to, because the letter was sent and hope was coming. Back home, the first sign came at dawn. A hawk circled low above the ridge, agitated, its cries sharp and urgent. Calder stood on the porch, coffee cooling in his hand, watching the tree line near the southern fence. Something felt off. The air was too still. The birds had gone quiet. And then he saw it hoof prints. Deep, fresh, pointed straight toward the ranch dot by noon. The dust kicked up on the horizon confirmed it. 3 riders, not cowhands, not travelers. Men with straight backs and dark hats pulled low, moving slow, deliberate, like they knew exactly where they were going, like they expected no resistance. Curtis Rowe had found her. Calder didn't tell Maybel at first. He didn't need to. She saw it in his face when he returned from checking the line. "He's here, isn't he?" she asked, voice barely above a whisper. Calder nodded. Maybel's hands trembled as she picked up the shotgun Willa kept behind the door. "I can help. I'm not hiding again." "You won't have to," Calder said. "But if things go wrong..." "Willa's got a wagon at the back pasture. The key's under the seat. You take it and go." "No," Maybel said, shaking her head. "Not without Joni. Not this time." They spent the next hour bracing the ranch. Willa locked the doors and doused the lanterns. Calder stationed Gus and 2 trusted hands on the roof of the barn and gave them rifles. He saddled Dagger but didn't mount up. He stood in the yard waiting, boots planted firm in the earth like rootstock by the time the riders reached the gate. The sky had darkened with clouds again. Curtis Rowe sat tall in the saddle, face as harsh as Maybel remembered, gray beard trimmed like a preacher's, eyes like winter ice, and a cruel smile that never touched them. The 2 men beside him were hired muscle, one young and fidgety, the other broad and blank-faced. "Briggs," Curtis said, tipping his hat mockingly. "Heard you had something of mine." "You heard wrong," Calder replied, shotgun resting calmly across his forearm. "There's nothing here for you," Curtis chuckled. "See, I ain't here to ask. I'm here to collect. She's my blood, my problem. You shelter her. That makes it your problem, too." Calder's voice turned to steel. "She's not your blood, and she's not your property." Maybel stepped out from behind the barn, then head high, shoulders squared. "You don't get to touch me again, Curtis," she said. "Not ever." His smile faltered. "You think this man's gonna protect you from the law? You stole from me, ran off like a thief." "I ran because you beat me," she snapped. "I ran because you're a monster dressed like a god." Curtis's hand dropped toward his holster, but Calder was faster. "Don't," he said. The click of his shotgun echoed like thunder. "You'll leave this land now, or I'll bury you in it." Curtis hesitated. His eyes flicked to the barn roof where Gus now stood, rifle aimed, then to Willa's shadow in the window, then to Maybel, standing tall, hands unshaking. "This ain't over," he growled. "You're right," Calder said. "It ends when she says it does." Curtis spat in the dirt, turned his horse, and rode off. His men followed, glancing back only once. When the dust settled, Maybel let out a breath she didn't know she'd been holding. Her knees buckled, and Calder caught her before she hit the ground. "You stood your ground," he whispered. "You did it." "I was terrified," she said into his shoulder. "But you didn't run." Willa came out of the house, wiping her hands on her apron. "Well, that was a fine little war," she muttered. "Now let's get some stew on. I think we all need to sit and breathe for a while." Later that night, the 3 of them sat around the kitchen table, the silence warm, not heavy. Maybel had a small bruise on her wrist from gripping the shotgun too tight. Her hand still shook a little when she held her cup, but her eyes? They were clear, steady. She wasn't looking over her shoulder anymore. "You think he'll come back?" she asked quietly. Calder nodded. "Maybe. But next time, he won't come knocking, and we'll be ready." Maybel nodded. Because this time, she wasn't the hunted. She was home. The ranch had known silence before, but never like this. It was the kind of silence that settles after a storm, after the shouting, the gunmetal tension, and the moment where everything could have broken. But idea in single quotes. Calder stood at the gate. Post the next morning, surveying the horizon. No dust trails. No signs of riders. Just sun rising over the mesa, golden and calm. The kind of morning you earned with scars. Inside the house, Maybel was writing again another letter. This time not to her sister, but to herself. She had been a runaway, a girl clawing roots from dry earth, a girl with no name, no shelter, no future. But now? She was writing as someone who belonged not just to a place, but to people. Willa brought her tea and sat beside her without saying a word. She didn't need to. They both knew what today was. Today, Joni would arrive. The plan had been simple, quiet. Gus had ridden out 2 days ago to the halfway station near the old mining trail, where one of Calder's friends from the army worked the wagons. He'd picked up Joni Quinn under the guise of moving feed, and Maybel hadn't slept since. She hadn't seen her sister in 2 years. What if she was different? What if she hated her for running? Or worse, what if Joni still believed Curtis? Calder found her pacing the yard just before noon, hands clenching and unclenching. He stepped beside her, offering calm without pressure. "She'd be here soon," he said gently. "I'm scared she won't recognize me," Maybel whispered. "I'm not the same. I don't look like I used to." "I've changed." Calder looked at her, eyes steady. "So has she. But love doesn't forget." They didn't have to wait long. By mid-afternoon, a dusty wagon rolled down the front trail, the sun glinting off its canvas. Gus sat in front, grinning ear to ear, and beside him, tucked beneath a shawl, clutching a bag to her chest, was Joni. Maybel didn't move at first. She stood frozen, hands at her sides, lips parted as her eyes drank in the sight of her little sister, taller now, but still with that same wide, unsure gaze. Joni climbed down slowly, boots hitting the ground like thunder in Maybel's chest. Then, "May?" Joni's voice broke, and Maybel ran. The two collided in a tangle of arms and tears, sinking to their knees in the dirt, sobbing and clutching each other like they were afraid to let go. "You're here," Maybel cried, hands buried in Joni's hair. "I can't believe you're here." "You wrote to me," Joni said between sobs. "I waited every day for you to come back. I never stopped trying." Behind them, Calder turned away, clearing his throat, giving the sisters their moment. Willa stood at the porch steps, arms folded tight against her chest, her eyes misty. Joni stayed in Maybel's old room that night. They talked until dawn, sharing stories, tears, whispered truths. Joni confessed how Curtis had grown meaner, how he'd punished her for being weak like her sister, and how she had been waiting for a way out. "I thought about running too," Joni said, "but I didn't know where I'd go. I didn't think anyone would take me." Maybel took her sister's hand. "You're home now. No one's ever going to hurt us again." In the hallway, Calder paused outside the door, overhearing just enough to know the ache these girls carried wasn't something that faded overnight, but it was fading, little by little. And that was enough. 3 days later, Calder stood at the edge of the south pasture with Maybel beside him. Joni was learning to ride, Willa was teaching her to cook, and the ranch for the first time in years felt full. Maybel looked at the horizon, then up at him. "You think he'll come again?" Calder didn't lie. "Maybe, but he won't find the same girl," she smiled. "No, he won't." She took a deep breath, the wind brushing her hair back, and for the first time since he found her digging in the dirt, Calder saw something different in her. Not survival. Peace. She wasn't hiding anymore. She was home. She was free. And when she walked back toward the house, toward her sister, toward Willa, toward this strange, hard-earned life, it wasn't with fear in her steps. It was with strength. Because Maybel Quinn had stopped running. And started living. 6 months passed. The land turned gold in the late summer sun. The creeks ran low, the cattle thickened on fat and grain, and the ranch buzzed with life. The winds that once carried fear and shadows now stirred only dust and laughter. Maybel Quinn stood at the edge of the corral, watching Joni help Gus break a young Mustang. Her little sister no longer little had grown bold. She rode hard, smiled often, and had a streak of fire in her that no man could snuff out, not even the one who'd tried. Curtis. Roe never returned. Rumors came through town he'd been driven off his land by a neighbor feud, or maybe he'd been arrested in Sutter County. One man swore he'd seen him boarding a train east with his hat low and his past catching up behind him. Maybel didn't care. Not anymore, because she wasn't afraid of him now. And more importantly, he no longer defined who she was. She wasn't the girl in rags anymore. She was a sister, a rancher. A woman with calloused hands and healed bones. She was home. That evening, Calder found her near the stream, the same spot where she'd once sat sharpening a knife in secret. Now she sat with a notebook open in her lap, scribbling in steady cursive. "You writing again?" he asked, leaning against the tree nearby. "Trying to," she said with a soft smile. "Willa says if I'm going to tell my story, I should. Do it right. Reckon she's right." They were quiet a moment. The creek trickled nearby, and the sky was bruising with the start of twilight. Maybel looked over at him. "Do you remember the first time we spoke?" he chuckled. "You mean when I found you on your knees in the dirt, trying to steal roots from dry land?" "I wasn't stealing," she said with a smirk. "I was borrowing from nature." Calder laughed. "You didn't say a word. Just stared at me like I was another man come to hurt you." "You weren't," she said. "That's what scared me the most." She closed the notebook. "I didn't know men like you existed. Not back then. I didn't think girls like you would ever stay," he admitted. She turned to him fully now, voice steady. "I stayed because you gave me more than safety." "What did I give you?" She looked him dead in the eyes. "A name that meant something again." His throat tightened. He removed his hat and rubbed the back of his neck. "You always had a name, May." "Maybe, but it was buried. You helped me dig it back up." She stepped closer, uncertain but sure-footed, the way. She walked now with purpose, not panic. "I don't know what this is between us," she said softly, "but I want to find out. If you do too." Calder didn't hesitate. He pulled her close, not like a man claiming a woman, but like one finally meeting her where she was, not ahead, not behind, beside. "I do." And in that still moment, under a sky just starting to turn silver, they kissed. No firework, no trembling, just the quiet certainty of two people who had survived the storm and now chose each other in the calm. Willa watched from the kitchen window and smiled. "About time," she muttered. Joni leaned on the counter behind her. "Told you they were too stubborn to admit it." Willa chuckled. "Some hearts just take a little longer to realize they're safe." A month later, Maybel signed her name. At the county courthouse, not for a marriage license, not yet, but for something just as bold. Land papers. Calder had carved off a piece of his own ranch and gifted it to her and Joni, not as a handout. "As partners. I'm not giving you charity," he said. "I'm giving you roots." Maybel grinned as she took the deed. "Then we'll make something grow." And they did. Joni raised goats and wrote poetry. Maybel trained horses and told the story to whoever needed to hear it. And Calder, he just kept riding beside her, steady as ever, letting her blaze the trail, because Maybel Quinn wasn't just the girl who had once dug for roots in the dust. She was the woman who planted them, and this time they were deep.